and welcome to our webinar. I am thrilled to be here with you all this evening as we are going to explore, take action on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, looking to outplay hunger across the curriculum. My name is Jennifer Williams, and we will be together for about the next hour. Really excited for people to join in. Welcome if you're here for our live webinar, and really excited to find ways to connect if you are joining with the recording. So we're going to dive right in. We have a full hour with ideas, inspiration, and some resources for you to take with you to bring back to the classroom. I'm going to kick it off with a little bit on my journey in education. I am coming to you live tonight from my home here in the United States in Florida, and I am a former K-12 classroom teacher, speech pathologist, and school principal, and also a college professor. And now I'm proud to represent my nonprofit organization, Take Action Global. And we are working with schools around the world on a mission of a climate education for all. And we have big goals to reach many, many students across the world. And currently, we are working with K-12 classrooms in over 173 countries. We just wrapped up our climate action project. I'll talk a little bit about that today, and our Climate Action Day event last week, where we were so happy to have game designers from Games for Change joining us. So I am honored to represent our global community of teachers and students. We are over 5 million strong now, and have hopes and dreams that we can find ways to make climate education and sustainable development accessible for all. So a little bit of context as we dive in. We are working at the intersection of climate and education. And we have been really curious about this idea of where coding, game development, and computer science fits in with this work. So along the way, we met our good friends at Games for Change, and we're so excited about the work that they were also doing in finding ways where teachers and students could be a part of the work of the UN Global Goals. And so a few years ago, we started connecting. We've had the opportunity to present on global stages. And just last week, we introduced our Climate Action Day virtual arcade, and we're able to showcase some of the fantastic games that have been created by students in past years. So that is available. Anyone can use that as inspiration as you kick off your experience for this year. So this tonight's webinar and our work over the past few months has led up to this theme for the Games for Change theme this year for Outplay Hunger. And we are really so happy to be involved as a content partner, developing resources with the World Food Program. So we're going to be talking about some of those resources tonight.
You lost your audio.
Are you able to hear me?
Yep, there you go.
Oh, okay.
Now.
Great. And so we're going to be talking about some of those resources as we go through tonight. So you're going to need one thing if you're joining live or if you're joining on the recording. You're going to need one piece of paper and something to write with, and that's about it. Everything else we will have for you in this Padlet board. So all of the resources that we talk about in our session this evening, I'll have here for you. And I'd love to invite you to jump in to our Padlet board, and I will go grab the link for you and also put that in the chat. And you can use the QR code if you want to look at this from your mobile device too. So here is our Padlet board. And once you get in, you'll see that we have some columns that are there waiting for you. So the first one is going to be a column with today's resources. So everything that you need instructionally with resources, you can check those out. Also, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the second column, I'd love to meet you and connect. Feel free to share resources and notes as you go along and any questions that you may have as well. So we'll check back on that Padlet board as we go through our session this evening. All right, so wonderful to meet you all and excited to share a little bit about my journey in education and sustainable development. So I started off as a classroom teacher working, and when I came into the profession, it was at a time where we were pretty much handed a boxed curricula, and they're like, here you go, this is going to be what your year looks like. By November, you should be on this chapter, working on these specific standards or goals. And then you just kind of keep moving on. And then by February, you should be here. And then by the end of the year in May and June, we would expect that you would have completed that boxed curricula. So somewhere along the way, I got really interested in this idea of education technology. And that was right around the time where we started to have this emphasis on creation. So this was around the year 2010. We were starting to find that innovation technology was being integrated into our classrooms across the curriculum, which was great. And we started to see teachers not working just in the front of the room, pouring information into our students. We were really standing right alongside of our students and working together. But something I recognized at the time was that we were often creating for what if scenarios. And so students in a distant future, when you're out in your career, what if this happens? What might you do? And how might you create impact? And so I started to get really curious about what if we were to create for a purpose and support our students to be able to take action now on something that they care about, that they can see the direct result of, no matter what age they were. So very young early childhood students being able to take action all the way up through our university students. So as I was becoming more interested in this idea of social impact, we as a world came together and agreed upon these 17 global goals. These sustainable development goals, otherwise known as the SDGs, that became a plan and a roadmap for our future. Of course, we have our very own goal with SDG 4, but as we know as teachers, our work spans every part of these sustainable development goals. The work we do crossing poverty and hunger and gender equality, finding ways to ensure equity, partnership, peace, and caring for our planet. So funny enough, I sent out a tweet and I was at a global ed forum. I was a part of a very small group of educators who were also interested in finding ways to connect students to purpose through action. And the UN responded and they were like, we are interested in finding ways that teachers and students can be a part of this work as well. So a few weeks later, I found myself at the United Nations headquarters, and they invited us to organize as a task force and find ways that we could ensure that education had a seat at the table and was represented. So we left that day, not really sure what we were going to do, but we knew we needed to expand that conversation. We were a small group of North American educators, and we wanted to find other teachers who may be interested in joining in. So we left that day, we got a hashtag Teach SDGs, and started a year of inquiry to really understand where these SDGs could fit into education and find out how we could better represent within conversations at the UN. So as I got going, and this was in 2016, I started to meet global educators who were also interested in this work. And I also started to see this theme bubble up around food, food justice, and nutrition, which brings us to our conversation today. But I'd love to tell you a few of those stories. The first one is someone I met on Twitter. And so my background is in literacy, and Lois is a professor in Kenya. And so Lois had come to me into my DMs, funny enough, and she wanted to see if I could help find ways to bring high quality instructional resources and books into the refugee camp there in her area in Kenya. I found it's really so challenging to get books into Kenya. We're still trying. We have since opened a school at the refugee camp, but in those early conversations, I was interested in learning more about what school looks like in those areas. Because for me, I had this assumption that school probably looked very similar to my schools here in Florida. A ceiling, walls, a floor, desks, a teacher in the front of the room, instructional resources. Maybe they didn't have technology like we had, but I had this assumption that school, for the most part, would look the same. So I asked Lois to send me a photo of what a classroom looked like. And I remember when she shared this with me via email, my emotion of seeing everything in this photo of without. And so I remember so clearly seeing students without clothes, some without shoes, a classroom without walls, without a ceiling, a class without a teacher in the front of the room, but a broken chalkboard propped up against a crooked tree. Of course, I since have learned there's so much hope and there's so much opportunity in school and what that means for these children, and an education for them is something that they will walk long distances to come to. And if a teacher doesn't show up eh, for that day, one of these older students, or maybe one with a lot of energy, will jump into that chair of the teacher to teach the other children for that school day. And so I bring up the story of Lois and this classroom in the Kakuma refugee camp to share that something I learned was that food was a main motivator, because for a lot of these children, they would walk those long distances to come to school because that was their only meal of the day. And any of the food that was left over, they would then be able to take home to their family members, which I very much connected with, because for the beginnings of my teaching career, I was also that classroom. A lot of the students who came to me, I was their only meal of the day, and I would send home food with them for them to have another meal with their family. So the connection of food, I think, continued on for me. This story of Herman, he was an intern on our in our program, and he was in Singapore, joined with us to help with our climate action project. He had a specific interest in climate and food, but because of COVID, he had just graduated high school. He was not able to head off to university as he had anticipated. So that was in August of 2020. And he joined as a volunteer for our project to help with translations, because that was what the need was at the time. And our project wrapped up then, just like it did last week for us here in 2024. But back in 2020, it wrapped up in November. And I remember getting this photo from Herman because he said, "I'm heading out. I can't stay put any longer. I got a flight. I'm going to South Africa." And I was like, "All right, Herman, who do you know in South Africa? What's happening there?" And he didn't know anyone, but he was heading there because he had this interest in interviewing Indigenous farmers to better understand how they were creating climate resistant crops and how they were using some of these indigenous farming practices in South Africa. And that was what he was wanting to take with him to university. He's now in Colorado studying, finishing up his program. But that's what he wanted to do his thesis on. So this connection of food in unlikely places. I think my final story here before I dive into some of the resources and experiences I've had recently, another classroom that I had met, and this is a classroom in my state of Florida. I'm in the middle of the state. They're in South Florida. And there were sixth grade students who had organized a team to be an after school club, and they called themselves Food Miles Matter. And so they were, as you can see, growing a lot of different types of food and plants for their cafeteria. And they wanted to meet with me to talk about ways that they could take what they were learning and expand it out to their school to make possibly a food sustainability class, but also how they could share those messages out with the world. So I remember this is their teacher, Hope Kennedy, and I did a Zoom call with them, which a few years back wasn't something as common as it is today. But we met and they talked about their goals, and then they decided that they were going to make a website that had tutorial videos that could share the messages and the learnings that they had with other schools. And so they each had a role. This was all student directed. And you can see here some of the students. They had students starting to join in as the project went on, but they identified within these roles. So you can see they had a script writer, a photographer, a filmmaker, someone who was going to be working on community outreach with writing letters and creating media. Hayden is the PSA actor. I mean, how cool are these different roles that these students are coming up with? So they had this standalone website that was a one-way device for learning, so other people could join in. But then they started to have classrooms say, well, would you mind doing a Zoom call with us? We want to learn about the program that you have with Food Miles Matter at your school, and we want to bring that to our school. So they started to host these sessions where you would have students teaching other students. And that had a few classrooms in the United States joining in. And then over the course of that year, they started to have global collaborations as well. This was just like an extra bonus because at the end, they decided they were going to submit their project, Food Miles Matter. You can see they even created social media pages for it. And they ended up winning $30,000 with the Lexus Eco Challenge that they were able to apply to their project, make it a class, and then expand it out to have a different club for the next year incoming sixth graders. And this just kind of shows that continuity because this was the next year group. And so they were focused on mangroves. And so the name of their program was Mangroves Matter. So I had another cool session with them, and they created their own social media accounts and did a lot of local community outreach down there in Miami. But these are the types of projects that I see all the time. So we open up through an inquiry-based project platform and talk about the SDGs, most specifically climate. And what we're finding are students are creating with inventions, with advocacy campaigns, theater productions. They're using art, they're using technology, they're using game design, and a lot of these green skills as they're developing out their solutions and then packaging them up to share out with the world. This is another one. This was a classroom that was working on the global goals, and they were talking about food waste, but then also waste from their cafeteria. And so they gathered up and they created a whole presentation on their process, but they made this really quite beautiful mural. And this is with 1 day's worth of trash from a lunch period. And so you can see there all of the different trash that was collected. So you have milk boxes and you have those containers, tin foil. So it was used to help create awareness within their school and then to launch their work that they were going to be doing for the entire year. So SDGs for me, starting back with just an idea of how might we use these 17 goals to inspire action, moving our classrooms kind of on that continuum of consumption, just reading about social action, reading about the stories of change makers, over to this idea of creating with a purpose, and then how can they take action for impact. So my journey across the roadmap of SDGs, of course, started with SDG 4, but quickly started to move along with interest in other areas, seeing the power of collaboration and partnership. I got very interested in SDG 17. My focus on work around access and equity. Then I got very interested in work around SDG 10. And then I would never have imagined being a literacy specialist, really focused on communication and collaboration, that all of my work would land in this bucket of science and focus on climate change and climate action. But what I found with the work that we were doing is for young people and for teachers that really care about this, all roads lead to climate change. And so we said, let's narrow and really be able to better understand the role that education can play, and that climate education can be a solution for climate change. So as I've shared some of these stories, I got also, I think, I guess those assumptions I had of the importance of food and food justice and nutrition and sustainability and the role that schools play in that, definitely over the past 2 years. So I'd love to invite you, and this is a great instructional strategy that I will use. If you can do one thing in your classroom as you're preparing for the game design components of your instruction, one thing I always talk to teachers about that you can do, and it's just need a piece of paper and a little bit of time and something to write with. And this can be an opportunity for you to have all of the voices in your class represented in just about 10 minutes. So this I find when teachers are like, how do I kick off bringing the SDGs into my classroom? This one is the one I love to go to. So it is called a card sort. So if you got that piece of paper, this would be a moment to grab it. And with your class, I always say just use scrap pieces of paper. It doesn't have to be anything special. And you'll take the paper, and I'm going to guide you through the card sort activity. And then you can test it out as we go along as well. If you're just joining in, and thanks to Mary Elizabeth, we have a Padlet board. So please feel free. The link is in the chat to share where you're coming from. And if you have any questions, please feel free to share those on the Padlet board or here in our chat on Zoom. All right. Hopefully you have your piece of paper. So what I do is, and this can be done with any age, the majority of our participants in this challenge are going to be middle school and high school classrooms, but this can be done in elementary. It even can be done if you're leading professional development for teachers. So you'll have your students take their piece of paper, and then you'll guide them to fold the piece of paper in half. because our classrooms are very used to guided instructions, step by step, someone creating for me, the teacher, you'll probably get a lot of questions. Which way should I fold the paper? What's the right thing to do? And continue to let them know it really doesn't matter. Anything they do is going to be fine. So fold it once, and then you're going to have them fold it again. Okay? Open that up and instruct them to tear along those lines. So that paper has 4 quadrants. You're going to tear along to then have 4 pieces of equally sized paper. All right. This can be done with any choice activity. I like to do this one with the SDGs, but you can do it with any choice activity, and it'll support your students in creating using an anchor item. So sometimes it's hard when you're having them abstractly think about, like, okay, well, what's your idea, and then be able to express that. So this will help them to create that schema in their mind. So this next step connected to the SDGs. Invite your students to select 4 SDGs that are interesting to them. And so I already shared kind of the 4 that I had that led me along this path to get to thinking about sustainable farming and food justice. So pick 4 that matter to you. As I shared, I was really interested in SDG 4. So maybe that's the first one I would write. I'm just going to kind of talk over the process. You would give your students some time to think through their SDGs, maybe like 10 minutes. Some of them might want to just write the SDG and the number. Some of them I find like to sketch out this icon. They might want to draw it. If you want to give them more time with colored pencils, that's always great too. I mentioned that SDG 17 was chronologically kind of the one that I went to next. SDG 10, and then settled in SDG 13. So I've modeled my thinking process. And so the next part, as you have them create their 4 cards, cool thing about this is any answer is right. So anything that they want to write, and maybe they even want to change and scratch it out, or maybe they only have 2, that all works. So the next part is critical, and it's asking them to take their cards and put them in order. So you're going to give them some time to put them in order. That will allow them to think through that process, have some explanations on that, and then give them time to share. So what SDGs were important to them and why? Some of them might say it's a chronological order. Some of them might have it be by preference or amount of time they're working on something, a relationship that they might have to specific global goals or a project they're working on in school. And this gives us as teachers so much data. We're able to better understand what our students are thinking about and the reasons why. So we can assess background knowledge as we get going. So as you're kicking off your student challenge, this might be a good way to introduce those SDGs. If you're here live in the session and you tested it out, I'd love to have you share the 4 SDGs that you selected. And it's another thing you can do is, as your students start to share, it helps to create those natural connecting points. So I shared SDG 13 is a global goal that's important to me. And so maybe if someone else here also said SDG 13 was important to them, maybe it might be something that I want to connect with them later. So please feel free to share in the chat your 4 SDGs, or if you want to come off mute and share either your top goal or your top 4, we'd love to hear from you. All right, while you're adding those in, I'll keep watching for those, but I'm excited to move us to the next part of our session because I wanted to show you a program that we implemented just this past year all around celebrating food. And I have some special guests that are joining with us that I asked to be here with us to share about their experience and the process that they had. So perfect. Thanks. And Melissa is actually sharing. So my 4 SDGs are climate, zero hunger, partnerships, and building sustainable cities. I'm assuming that's perfect. That's great. So you can see that Melissa and I have some connection. Some are the same. If I had time, if I were in my classroom and I was working with Melissa, maybe I would take time and ask her to share why is that the order? Why are those the global goals she's selected? So, okay, cool. So, we have been working with schools around the world on this idea of climate action at scale. So, how might a school really embed climate action work and the topics around it at every classroom and within every subject? And so, every year we have 100 schools that join with us. And food, community gardens, hydroponics, aquaponics have really become an area of interest with our programs. And so, one school that joined with us from the beginning, we're now in year 3, is a school in Chicago that is really leading the way on these topics. And so, we have partnered up on a couple different things over the past few years. We were really proud last year to have a culminating project for all 100 schools that was inspired by DePaul College Prep. And it was looking at food waste recipes. And so we created a global cookbook. Every classroom able to contribute, share about their culture, share about food waste recipes that we could then share with each other and publish out to the world. As we were working on that, we also started to get excited about the idea of taking a small group of students from Chicago to the UN and to New York City, the backyard of the UN, for World Food Day just this past month in October. And so we started planning, we had big hopes and dreams, and then we were able to execute. So we worked for a few weeks to prepare with the students, and we were learning about World Food Day. We were learning about the SDGs. We were trying to make connections with what they were doing within their own school to the trip that we were planning in New York City. And so I'm so pleased today to introduce Melissa, the leader of this climate action school. And I think just such an innovator and an inspiration in the work around all these topics we're talking about tonight. So Melissa, I'd love to have you introduce yourself and your students and share about our adventure that we just went on.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, John. It's great to be here and be with some of my students tonight. It has been such a fun journey with Jennifer. And when I started teaching sustainable urban food systems, I wasn't quite sure where it was going to lead. And each year it leads to something different. It leads to a more in-depth experience for our students. It leads to opportunities like going to New York. And what I have seen year over year is some of the hearts and minds of my students changing. Once, when they come in, they might not always be sure what effect climate change is happening. Being in the Midwest, we're lucky we don't have as many immediate effects of climate change, but as we all know, they're coming and they're here. They might just not be as obvious. It's 15 degrees above normal for the past month, so we know things are changing. And each year, my students really surprise me and amaze me about how their hearts do change. Once they start learning about the impacts that are happening and they start learning about how they can have an impact on reducing the effects of climate change, they really do take part. They all just finished a personal climate action project. One of my students that went with us to New York said that experience changed what she wanted to study in college, which is so exciting. But I really want our students, Sheila and Brennan, who join us this evening, to tell you about their experience and how they felt this program has changed them. So Sheila and Brennan, if you want to start.
Hi. Here. Do you want to start, Brendan, just to talk about like what the trip was?
Yeah, no, totally. So we had an amazing opportunity to get to go to New York with a couple people from multiple of our classes. So it wasn't just one class that went, but a few from each of the sections of our class that Miss Flynn teaches. And so we got to go with Take Action Global, and we got to visit some pretty cool places around New York, which we'll tell you about in the next couple slides.
Yeah, so for day one, we arrived like a little, maybe around 2 or 3 p.m. So we started by going to get some pizza, as is a quintessential New York experience, considering there was a pizza place literally on every corner. And then we went off into the world. We walked the High Line, and then some of our classmates gave a great presentation on that and like the history of the High Line and the way it's brought like different plants into the city. Then we went to Chelsea Market, which has a lot of history in New York. Day one was that was probably one of the chillest days, just because that was when we just got there. Day one was a great start to the trip. Next slide.
Day two, we got to go to the United Nations, which was really exciting. We got to tour. You can see in one of the pictures, we are in one of their meeting rooms, which is really cool. And we got to learn a little bit more about the sustainable development goals, which we've been learning about in class. And so it was really cool to like get to see them in practice within the actual United Nations headquarters. After that, we went to the Ford Foundation, which was kind of like a continuation of the ideas that we were learning about at the United Nations, which was really cool. And we got to meet some really cool people at the Ford Foundation and hear about their how their chef like incorporates sustainability into making food for the whole entire building, which was really cool, given that there's a lot of people who work inside of it. And then after, we went to Rethink Food, which is a nonprofit that works on reducing food waste from restaurants in New York, which was really cool, because then after we went to dinner at Marlowe Bistro, which is a restaurant that partners with Rethink. And so we got to kind of see their full work in action throughout the day.
Okay, day three. So we started out the day by going to a school in the Bronx that has a similar program to ours. Jen talked about hydroponics. They had like a really cool hydroponics lab. They had a huge garden, especially considering it was in such a big city. We had a lot of fun at the school, and we got to meet like different kids. They did like a dance for us. It was a lot of fun. And then after that, we took the subway to the mayor's office, and we got to talk to one of his advisors that works with a lot of legislation regarding sustainability in New York. We got to hear a lot of really interesting stuff about what they're doing. An example of that would be they switched hospital food in hospitals used to be a default meat product, but by switching it to plant, they're able to reduce the amount of people taking the meat option by like 50%, which is really great, because as you may know, the meat industry has been a huge pollutant, and animal agriculture is a huge pollutant in America. So that was super interesting to hear about how New York was doing that on a city level, especially coming from a big city like Chicago. Then we departed, and we got home that night, and we started working on this project.
Okay, so to hear a little bit about the student experience, one thing that I found really interesting and like cool to learn about was specifically like how Rethink works with local restaurants in New York to approach food insecurity from the hospitality perspective rather than the traditional nonprofit perspective. One of our friends, Riley, said that her favorite thing about the trip was that it really opened her eyes to possible career paths that she never would have thought about when she was older, surrounding environmental issues and sustainability. And then our friend Eddie, he said one of his favorite parts was going to 811X, which was the public school that we got to visit. And he just like loved seeing how they were able to incorporate all different types of learners and students within their community and made sure that everyone felt connected and was a part of it.
Then our final trip takeaways, it was such a short trip, but we got to have so many amazing experiences and learn so much. Some of the ones that we talked about that we really took away was, one, there's such a huge connection between climate and equity. Like, it's the environmental movement, very much, a lot of people think it's just about the environment, but it's also about like with the sustainable development goals, with no poverty and health, and making the world a better place for everyone and making sure no one gets left behind. We also learned a lot about how like all the multiple levels that change happens on. It's not just happening like on an individual level. It's not just happening on a governmental level. We got to see like all of it. Like the United Nations was the international. We got to see the city state level with the mayor's office. We got to see a nonprofit level with Rethink. We got to see like local communities with the school. And then finally, the fact that community building and collective action is one of the most, it's probably the most effective way to continue to tackle environmental issues. Like a single person can't solve everything, but by coming together as a community, we can. So that would be like some of our main takeaways that we got from this trip. Then after that, it's just, we just have a list of like everyone who went.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sheila and Brennan. Brennan, any last words you'd like to share?
I would say it was such an inspiring trip, just getting to see and learn. So I mean, like we did so much within 3 days, and it's definitely one that will stick with me for a really long time. So yeah.
Fantastic.
It
Thank
was
you
a lot of
both
fun.
very much.
Thanks for letting us be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Melissa, as we look through these photos, and also Brennan and Sheila too, if you want to weigh in, maybe ideas for any of the teachers who are listening in, because they're going to be working with their students on creating games. And so they're going to be mapping out what those games might look like, and then diving into the coding and, solutioning part of that. Anything that we took away, and ours was more hands-on, especially with the work we were doing with Rethink and with the school in the Bronx, showing some of those pictures there. Any ideas that we have that maybe they could take away with them?
One of the things I was thinking of that we do with our students, the final exam in my class is a cooking challenge. And so every year there's a different challenge that the students have to do. And last year we had them come up with a 2-day meal plan as if they were on Snap. So how would they budget that? So I'm wondering if there's a way to gamify that and allow people from all over the place to understand how hard it would be if they were on Snap. So having to, build the meal plan, maybe pick from different things. Another thing that the students on this call did already was we created our sort of caricature of what an activist would need. So they created drawings. Do you want to, Sheila or Brennan, do you want to talk about some of the things we included in the drawings? That could be a fun game for some younger students. What were some of the things our activists needed?
Let's see. This was we did this in class. Yes, I do remember this. I think my group, I think we had like a megaphone. To be totally honest, I think some people got very focused on making a funny face on their drawing, but like not the point. We talked about like how you need to be vocal about your opinions and like not like don't just keep it to yourself, like talk to people and communicate with people, that type of thing.
Yeah. My group, I know we like included ears so they could listen to people and like hear others' ideas. We gave them a mouth so they could like share their ideas. Like we focused, I think, a lot on like things that are often like overlooked or like an important part of an activist. And like we made sure to like give them a heart so they had like the ability to like care and like think about others. We gave them a phone too to like share their message. But so yeah, I think we all came up with a lot of like good, fun ideas and ones that you wouldn't like traditionally think of. So yeah.
Then also, if I can just add, like if we're going further down the idea of like possible game ideas, I remember like similar to the thing Miss Flynn was talking about with like sort of budgeting on Snap, I believe we did something that was like an online sort of game or simulation of like what it's like living paycheck to paycheck and how you would be budgeting that, like the sacrifices you need to make, like for example transportation, working very far away versus working closer for a lower salary, and like those type of things, or like what happens when your kid gets sick and do you take a day off work, can you afford missing the paycheck, that type of thing, which is really great, I think, especially because we're a private school, so most of our students are fairly like well off, middle class, upper middle class. So it's good to be able to understand what it really is like saying like well, what if you don't have these supports that you currently have in your life? Like, because it's very, very different for families that don't have like the kinds of resources that we do.
Sheila and Brennan may be too young to remember this game. I don't know if people still play it, but I feel like creating some sort of modern day version of the game of life where you have to think about where your food is coming from. You have to think about what your impact is if you take a 40-minute shower. The personal climate action projects that some of our students did focused on reducing their water usage or focused on taking public transportation versus driving. So I think all of those things could be gamified and made interesting to see what are you doing? Because a lot of times it's not that people don't want to change. They don't even really necessarily, because they're so busy, know the impact that they're currently having. So if it can be a fun way to learn, it might make people change their minds a little bit more. Because once you know, you can't really go back.
This would be leaning a little more on the environmental side of it. But I remember in computer science a couple years ago when I was in that class, we were coding on a program called NetLogo, and one of the programs that we made on NetLogo was about soil contaminants. So there's also like a lot of interesting things I'm sure you could do, or like for example, maybe different emissions that put greenhouse gases into the air. Like there's a lot of ones that people don't think of. For example, agriculture, even if it's not animal agriculture, even like soybean production is a huge, huge pollutant in the US, especially because so much of that soybean ends up going into animal feed. So like maybe something that shows like the different types of contaminants that are contributing to pollution would be interesting as like a gamified thing.
It's incredible to have you all with us sharing this in-school example of what you were able to create and make happen just with an idea. And I'm so grateful for you taking time out of your evening to share with us today. Brennan and Sheila, Melissa Flynn, you all are a true inspiration to me. And hopefully we can follow along with some of the games that these students are going to be creating over the next several months and then come back together and play some of them in the class later on in the spring. So please tell everyone that we said hi and we'll catch up later.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. One picture that I scrolled through too, and the students at DePaul brought seed packets, and we had a formal seed exchange ceremony where the students at 811X in the Bronx had seed packets ready for us. And then we had a really beautiful moment where we were exchanging those. So these are just some of the classroom photos that they had at 811X, and then our wrap-up conversation with the mayor's office there in New York City. So continue to be inspired. That was such a special trip. And I think something that could also be done in local levels. Now I know that DePaul being back in Chicago, they're working on an impact report, looking at connecting with their local mayor and local community members on how they can bring their learnings back into their local area. So looking at some of these global topics and localizing them. And as you teachers are getting ready to head out on your game design adventure, we have a few instructional resources to go along with the activities that you'll have. So these are really going to be focused on SDG 2 with zero hunger, but of course we're bringing in connections to SDG 4, SDG 12. I feel like SDG 13, there's connections on everything that we're doing. And we have 3 of these resources ready for you to explore. The first one is going to be around the inspiration we had from our cookbook, Food Waste Recipes, something that you can do in your classroom. The next activity is around food security innovations. And then finally, we have school nutrition. So definitely we're kind of covering a lot of different topics because this is quite a broad theme when you're thinking about these different areas around food. So please check those out. Let us know how they go. I can't wait to hear any feedback that you have with your students and from your experience. So you all are going to head out and start to work on your challenge with your students. But if you need us for anything, we will be here every step of the way, checking in, working with the Games for Change team. And then I'll see you at the end on the big event. And last year I was able to serve as a judge, so hopeful to be able to do that again this year. As we wrap up our session for tonight, if you're joining live, we would love to share the 2024-2025 PD survey for our workshop tonight. And if you're joining from a recording, we'll be sure to get that over to you. So as we wrap up, I will stop sharing my screen and head over to the Padlet to see if there's any questions. Feel free to share your contact information in there. If you have specific questions, I'll get back with you. But thank you to the Games for Change team. It is such an honor to be working with you all. I can't wait to see how this theme develops over the year and to talk to you all soon. So thank you so much.